Hey guys, tonight we step barefoot into soft, sun-warmed dust, with the shadows of latticework gates stretching long and lazy across polished sandstone. You're standing before a walled garden, its domes peeking above like curious cats, its carved gates cracked, just enough for golden light to spill out like melted butter. A warm breeze nudges you forward, carrying the faint scent of ripe mango and river mud, and you know, this isn't your average park stroll. You're about to wander into a world where geometry hums with spiritual intent. Every flower bed has a backstory, and the emperors. Oh, they're watching, some from balconies, some from beyond the grave. But hey, you probably won't survive this walk, not in the danger sense, but in the blissfully conk out before Section 3 kind of way. It's okay. I won't judge. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop your location and the local time in the comments. Bonus points if it's past midnight and you're already yawning. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You shuffle forward. The garden gate creaks open, just enough for your curiosity to slip in, trailing behind your shadow. You're not the first to enter here. In fact, hundreds of years ago, nobles and mystics, poets and pigeons, all wandered through these very arches, searching for something. Peace, maybe, or just a shady spot with a good breeze. The sandstone beneath your feet is still warm from the sun's retreat, and its surface is smooth, worn down by generations of royal slippers and bored bureaucrats in curly-toed shoes. Overhead, a carved Jaroka window stares blankly at you, framed by floral lattices that seem to whisper, "Don't rush." This place was made for slow. As you take your first steps into the Mughal garden, the hush is what strikes you most. Not silence exactly, but a soft layering of sounds, like someone turned the world's volume knob to doze. Distant cooing from pigeons. The rustle of leaves shaking off the heat. The thunk of a ripe guava falling somewhere you can't quite see. A gentle breeze flutters by, lifting the edge of a dry leaf and puffing the hem of your shirt. You glance up. The sky's gone watercolor, smeared mauve, soft orange, with a hint of bruised plum near the horizon. That's the thing about walking through a Mughal garden at sunset. It's like stepping into a painting that's still drying. Historians still argue whether the layout of these gardens was primarily political, religious, or just one upmanship between emperors who couldn't help but out-garden each other. Whatever the reason, you benefit, because now you get to walk through a paradise designed to show off, soothe souls, and maybe humble a few French ambassadors. A domed pavilion comes into view ahead, its white marble glowing faintly, like it remembered the sun. It's perfectly placed. Of course it is. The Mughals were geometry nerds with an aesthetic streak, and symmetry was their love language. You're already noticing how everything seems to mirror itself. Trees line up like disciplined soldiers. Fountains sprout precisely where your eye expects them. Even the birds seem to fly in formation, though that might just be coincidence, or trained parrots. Your path curves, and suddenly the garden opens up. You see long water channels, tiled in faded blues and greens, stretching like lazy veins through the landscape. On either side, rows of neatly trimmed hedges box in flower beds. No chaos here, no wild growth, Everything curated, controlled, a power move in petals and pathways. One mainstream fact historians agree on: Mughal gardens were based heavily on Persian design, especially the charbagh. A four-part garden meant to represent paradise itself. The Quran speaks of rivers flowing beneath the gardens of heaven. The Mughals decided to get a head start. But here's your quirky tidbit. Emperor Babur, the dynasty's founder, wasn't super into India at first. Too hot, too flat, not enough melons. He called it a land of little charm, and immediately set about planting gardens to make it feel more like home. Basically, Babur coped with relocation stress through aggressive landscaping. You pause under a neem tree, letting the shade cool your scalp. A bee hums past your ear, not threatening, just a little drunk on the scent of blossoms. There's something soothing about this planned perfection. The world outside might be chaos, wars, dynastic betrayal, or, wheat-fi outages. But in here, the grass is trimmed, the air smells of sandalwood, and nobody's yelling. You reach a small stone bench set into the curve of the wall. The stone is cool now, and when you sit, the view aligns just right. Not a coincidence. These gardens weren't just for strolling. They were for sitting, contemplating, and occasionally making pointed eye contact with rivals across the lotus pool. A small boy runs past, probably imaginary, dressed in saffron-colored robes. You imagine him carrying a scroll, or maybe a slightly illicit mango. Somewhere behind him, a tutor sighs. The scent changes, less floral now, more earthy, as if the ground itself is settling in for sleep. You lean back, arms stretched over the bench, and let the last warmth of the day soak into your skin. Above you, the stars begin to blink one by one, shy and slow, like they're waiting to be invited. The Mughal emperors once stood right here, or lounged, possibly napped, maybe all three. You wonder what they thought about while staring at this very sky. Conquest, poetry, dinner. A distant splash interrupts your daydream. A duck, possibly. Or someone being far too enthusiastic with a ceremonial footbath. And as your eyes drift shut, just for a second, of course, you feel the garden wrap around you. Not like a trap, but a sigh. A centuries-old exhale that says, stay as long as you like. Sunset comes every day, but this moment, this one's yours. The bench is behind you now. The stone's chill replaced by the faint warmth in your souls as you walk farther into the garden's heart. The light is shifting again. Quieter now, tinged with rose, gold, and that pale blue that makes shadows look longer than they really are. Every step feels like part of a deliberate pattern. You glance down. Sure enough, the path is tiled in geometric mosaics, stars nested inside hexagons, framed by fine borders of sandstone and marble. Some designs are missing chips, faded at the corners, but still holding on. Like they're saying, we've been pretty for centuries. Don't start judging now. This isn't just a walk anymore. It's a gentle descent into the mind of the Mughals. And spoiler, they were kind of obsessed with control, especially in gardens. You're walking through what historians call charbagh, literally, 4 gardens. A massive square split by 2 water channels that meet at a central fountain, dividing the space into 4 perfectly symmetrical quarters. It's a format imported from Persian ideals of paradise, where order equals harmony and, let's be honest, if your garden isn't mathematically balanced, are you even ruling properly? But historians still argue whether this design was purely symbolic or deeply spiritual. Was the charbai about demonstrating imperial control over nature? Or was it a portable patch of heaven, a devotional map to the afterlife, disguised as landscaping? Either way, you're standing in it, and it's lovely. A little over the top shore, but still. The way the setting sun hits the central canal, chef's kiss. You stroll toward the center, where a fountain lazily bubbles up. The water isn't flashy. It's slow, sleepy, like the garden knows it's past showtime and the real crowd has gone home. You crouch to dip your fingers in. Cool, surprisingly so. The marble lip of the channel is worn smooth, slick with algae in the places no one quite bothers to scrub anymore. A dragonfly zips past your nose. You flinch. It doesn't care. Along the canal, trees have been planted in pairs. Cypress for death, fruit trees for life. Bit dramatic, but hey, that's the aesthetic. The symbolism of the Mughal garden was thick. Everything meant something. Water was purity. Shade meant wisdom. Even the angles of the walkways could lead your thoughts toward the divine, or toward the nearest date palm, depending on how spiritual you were feeling. You lean closer to the water and spot fish. Just a couple, plump, lazy, flashing orange, gold in the ripples. They seem to know you're watching. Or maybe they're just showing off. Probably both. A gentle breeze rolls in again, nudging a few pink petals off the nearest tree. They drift down like confetti thrown by someone half asleep. You glance around, half expecting someone to hand you sherbet in a bejeweled cup. That's what used to happen here, after all. Emperors didn't just build these gardens to be admired. They lived in them, worked in them, schemed in them. Sometimes they even wrote poetry here. Other times, they plotted invasions while lounging under a fig tree. Who says multitasking is new? And here's a weird but delightful tidbit. Mughal gardens often had built in wine coolers. Stone compartments dug near water channels where bottles could be left to chill naturally. The perfect blend of luxury and passive refrigeration. You stop walking for a moment and just breathe. Deep. The kind of breath you only take when you're surrounded by things that took centuries to build, but are still here, mostly intact. Some things crack, sure, but the bones hold. The intention lingers. Nearby, a white egret steps through a shallow pool, dignified and deliberate. You swear it gives you a side eye. One of the garden's outer walls rises to your left now. Red sandstone with inlaid patterns, floral motifs carved in white marble, each blossom unnervingly symmetrical. The Mughals were fond of inlay, especially pietra dura, where semi-precious stones are set into marble to form elaborate images. Leaves, vines, sometimes entire miniature trees. It's art that whispers, "This took forever," and we don't care if you notice. But please do. You trace one of the inlays with your eyes. A tulip curling around a cluster of grapes. Not native to the region. Imported, like much of the Mughal aesthetic. Persia, Central Asia, even a dash of Ottoman flair. It's all mixed in, stirred together by emperors with excellent taste and way too much free time. The garden stretches on in all directions, each quadrant a mirror of the next. Yet somehow none of it feels repetitive. That's the charm. Symmetry, but not monotony. Repetition with just enough variance to keep your brain soft and happy. You step into a cross path, the place where the main water channels intersect. At the center is a raised platform. It once held a tent, probably embroidered silk in jewel tones, propped on ivory poles. This was the epicenter, the Emperor's chill zone. Here, with a breeze, a drink, and a view in all four directions, decisions were made, poems composed, naps absolutely taken. You sit on the edge of the platform. It's warm, dry, slightly gritty. You lie back slowly, arms out, eyes up. The sky is lavender now, the first star twinkling like it's testing the atmosphere. From somewhere deeper in the garden comes the faint sound of bells. Not loud, just the occasional, delicate ting. Maybe wind chimes, maybe an anklet, maybe your imagination deciding to add a soundtrack. You think about Babur again, the original Mughal emperor, still homesick for Kabul, even while he was conquering Delhi. He missed his cool hills, his fast rivers, his fragrant gardens. So he built new ones right here. Imported trees, designed layouts, and kept writing in his diary about missing proper melons. It's a little tragic and kind of relatable. Homesickness, garden therapy, compulsive journaling. Ancient rulers, they're just like us. But here's the thing, Babur's garden obsession planted more than trees. It started a tradition that would shape an empire's aesthetic for centuries. These weren't just pleasure spots. They were metaphors with flower beds, power rendered in petals, control made visible and fragrant. A mosquito buzzes near your ear. You flick it away. It comes back. Of course it does. Mughal emperors had palaces and wine coolers, but they still had mosquitoes. Some things never change. You stand slowly, brushing grit from your palms, and take one last look down the channel. The water's surface reflects the sky now, still as glass, like it's holding the sunset hostage. The garden hums, not loudly, just softly enough to settle into your bones, as if it's reminding you that geometry isn't just for show. It's a map, a rhythm, a lullaby written in hedges and stone. You drift farther from the center platform, veering gently toward one of the side quadrants. But the path beneath your feet is narrower now, flanked by slender cypress trees that stretch upward like polite sentinels. Their shadows fall long and straight, as if even the trees know how to respect Mughal symmetry. A squirrel darts across the gravel ahead of you, pauses, and scolds you with an indignant chirp. Sorry, buddy. Didn't mean to interrupt your imperial acorn hunt. This quadrant feels more intimate, cozier, though that word probably wasn't in Babur's architectural vocabulary. Low hedges form tidy squares, filled with flowering shrubs that smell faintly of honey and citrus. It's quieter here, except for the soft buzz of something unseen, and the faint splash of water continuing its patient journey through the narrow rills. You follow the sound and find a small raised tank tucked behind a stone wall. The water inside isn't just decorative. It's moving. It flows in and out through meticulously carved spouts, shaped like stylized lotus blossoms. The Mughals were big fans of the lotus, symbol of purity, rooted in murky water, but blooming clean and bright. Kind of like empire building, if you squint at it philosophically enough. Historians still argue whether these secondary pools were for bathing or irrigation. Maybe both. Or maybe just a place to sit and dip your feet while eating rose, syrup, soaked sweets, and complaining about administrative headaches. A very Mughal way to multitask. You perch on the edge and trail your fingers through the water. A few petals float by, white, pink. One that looks suspiciously like it's been nibbled. Maybe the squirrel's side hustle is flower tasting. The air smells of jasmine now, heady and thick, like someone left the perfume tap running. A breeze carries the scent past your nose, then tugs at your clothes like a sleepy child needing attention. It's almost enough to make you forget you're walking through what was once a political power statement, disguised as a landscape design. Because let's be honest, this wasn't just about pretty trees. The garden was propaganda, lush, green, and surprisingly subtle. By building beauty, emperors were saying, look what we can control. Even nature obeys us. And to be fair, they really committed. Some Mughal gardens were built with precise calculations to reflect astronomical alignments. Others included acoustic designs where fountains and steps were placed to enhance echoes. The emperor says something, and the whole garden literally repeats it back. Not creepy at all. You step into a shaded alcove, just a niche in the garden wall, barely big enough for a cushion or two. The plaster here is decorated with faded floral murals, curling vines and birds mid-flight. You lean against the wall, and for a moment, it's like time slips sideways. You imagine an attendant just around the hedge, ready with a tray of pomegranate seeds and chilled rosewater. And speaking of birds, overhead, a parakeet shrieks at absolutely nothing. A burst of green feathers, an unprovoked tantrum, and then silence again. Birds love this place. Always have. Historical accounts even describe emperors training hawks here or releasing flocks of pigeons just to watch them wheel across the sunset. But here's a quirky detail some Mughal nobles bred nightingales, specifically to sing in the evenings, trained to start their songs on cue with hand gestures or bells. So while you're here, keep an ear out. You never know who might be in rehearsal. The hedge path continues, winding through tight rows of flowering trees. Orange blossoms, almond, even banana, though the banana trees look slightly out of place, like someone invited them late to the party. Their broad leaves rustle as you brush past, giving off that earthy green scent that makes your shoulders relax, whether you want them to or not. And then there's a sudden view. An opening in the hedge reveals a tiny pavilion, octagonal, with thin pillars and a dome like an upside-down teacup. Its stone floor is cool underfoot, and at the center, a small square pool reflects the last traces of sunlight. You step inside. Instantly, it feels a few degrees cooler, the kind of cool that comes not from shade, but from design. The dome above was built to draw hot air upward, creating a passive ventilation system before air conditioning was even a glimmer in anyone's fever dream. Historians still debate whether these pavilions were spiritual retreats or just upscale garden furniture. Some claim emperors used them for private meditation. Others suggest they were for quiet meetings or romantic encounters. Either way, you're not judging. It's very comfortable. You sit by the pool and trail a toe in. The water is shallow, barely ankle deep, just enough to sparkle. You notice the tiles, bright blue, glazed with patterns so intricate they make your modern smartphone wallpaper look a little lazy. Some are chipped. One has a footprint baked into it, probably from some long-forgotten craftsman who misjudged the drying time and just thought, close enough. Outside the pavilion, the garden is starting to shift. Colors deepen. Shadows stretch and blend. The birds settle. Even the insects get quieter, like they know curtain call is near. You lean back against a pillar, letting your eyes half close. The air is full of that in-between light, where everything softens and even history seems to loosen its stiff collar. You think about Shah Jahan, the emperor who built the Taj Mahal, sure, but also commissioned some of the most elaborate gardens in India. He believed beauty was a reflection of divine order, that by perfecting the garden, you perfect the soul. Of course, not everyone bought into that. Some contemporaries thought the expense was absurd. A handful of nobles wrote, grumpily, that perhaps more time spent in military drills and less time designing lily ponds might have helped in the long run. Still, here you are, sitting in a whispering stone pavilion while twilight tucks itself in around the edges. You can't help but think maybe Shah Jahan was onto something. A bat flutters past the entrance. Just one, silent and smooth like a floating scrap of velvet. It disappears into the trees, and you're left with just the rustle of leaves and the very faint glug of the fountain behind you. You rise, slowly, reluctantly. The stone is reluctant to give up your warmth, as if saying, "You sure? It gets darker after this." "But yes, you're sure." There's more to see, more to remember, and the garden. It's not done with you yet. You step out of the pavilion with that gentle wobble you get after sitting too long in quiet thought. Legs a little sleepy, heart a little slow. The stone path greets your feet again, cooler now. The sun's dipped low enough that only a narrow golden strip remains, stretched like taffy across the treetops. You take a left, and the path narrows again, pulling you deeper into the fourth quadrant of the garden. This one feels different. You can't explain it right away. Maybe it's the silence, or the way the hedges lean in ever so slightly, as if listening to your footsteps. The air carries a new scent, too. Not flowers this time, but something woody, like cedar, laced with the faintest hint of smoke. You don't see smoke, though. Just a lone gardener in the distance, walking with a bundle of sticks balanced on his shoulder like an oddly humble echo of a Mughal prince with a spear. This part of the garden was likely the most private. The fourth quadrant in many Mughal layouts often served a specific purpose, sometimes religious, sometimes medical, occasionally reserved for women of the court. Historians still argue whether these spaces were symbolic, paradise corners, or just a place to hide from court gossip. Honestly, both seem reasonable. You pass a small grove of neem trees, their bark rough and papery. In Mughal times, neem was treasured, not for its aesthetics. It's kind of scraggly, let's be real, but for its medicinal properties. Anti-inflammatory, antifungal, allegedly could cure anything from ulcers to bad vibes. Akbar the Great reportedly had a personal physician who swore by neem oil, though it smells like regret and old socks, so good luck with that. And now, a pause, because in the middle of this quadrant sits something odd. A low platform square, almost like a stage without an audience. On it a sundial, its gnomon casting a shadow long and lean across carved markings. You step closer, peering down, and notice tiny inscriptions in Persian. Some of them are time indicators. Others, astronomical symbols. One looks suspiciously like Saturn wearing a monocle. You stand still, tracing the shadow with your finger. It's pointing to what would have been the 5th hour afternoon. Somewhere between tea and dinner, depending on the emperor's mood. The Mughals were obsessed with time. Not just in a don't be late way, but cosmically. Their gardens didn't just reflect geometry. They mirrored cosmic order. The layout of 4 quadrants represented the Quranic vision of paradisey rivers of milk, honey, wine, and water flowing through lush gardens. A bit metaphorical, sure, But the Mughal architects decided to go literal. Because why not flood your lawn with sacred symbolism and impress the neighbors? Still, there's debate. Some scholars argue these gardens were less about religion and more about status. After all, nothing says, "I'm richer than you," like importing white marble fountains and designing a flower bed shaped like a poetic verse. You keep walking, curving around the sundial and past a hedge that breaks into another open area. Here, you find raised flower beds in geometrical patterns, squares within squares, each bordered by thin, carved stone. The flowers are sleepy now, marigolds with closed petals, hibiscus curling in on themselves like shy dancers post-performance. And tucked among them, something unexpected, an old apiary box. Bees, real or imagined, still hum around it. You lean closer, noticing faded painted panels. Floral, of course, because even the bees deserve art. The Mughals kept bees for honey, sure, but also believed bees symbolized discipline, unity, and divine industry. A bee works for the whole hive, not itself, like a really tiny bureaucrat with wings. You follow a bee for a few lazy seconds, watching it dip and vanish among the blossoms. Then the breeze picks up again, this time cooler. The kind of breeze that brushes the back of your neck and whispers, "Twilight's coming. Pick up the pace." So you do. The path forks, and you choose the right. It leads you beneath an arch of climbing vines. Bougainvillea, bright magenta in the fading light. Their petals scatter across the gravel like confetti from a party you weren't invited to. The vines rustle as you brush past, and somewhere nearby, a peacock cries. You pause. Listen. Wait. Nothing. Just one solitary yell, probably to assert dominance over a squirrel. The path curves again and opens into a circular clearing, at the center of which stands a chhatri, a dome-topped pavilion, perched on delicate columns like a parasol left behind by an absent-minded goddess. You step under it. The stone bench inside is smooth, worn down by centuries of royal behinds. You sit, and here's where the time folds a little. You think about the emperors who might have sat in this exact spot. Humayun, who loved stargazing more than ruling. Or Jahangir, who kept a detailed daily diary filled with complaints about food quality and praise for garden upgrades. He once wrote about a squirrel that bit him. That feels relevant. And maybe you think of the women, too. The empresses who rarely got mentioned in the history books, but orchestrated everything from garden designs to political alliances while pretending to be just decorating. Even commissioned her own rose garden with so many species. He's imported them, possibly. And here the customs probably love the nervous breakdown. It's not just names and dates. It's traces. You sit in the echo of long, dead footsteps, hear laughter that dissolved centuries ago into this very wind. And then another sound, faint music. A flute somewhere behind the trees. Not modern, not loud. Just a few drifting notes. Almost like memory playing a song just for you. Could it be a gardener? A trick of the breeze? Or maybe the ghost of a court musician warming up for the emperor's evening stroll? You lean your head back against the stone and let the sound wash over you. One phrase. Another. A pause, and then nothing again. The sun's almost gone now. The sky's turning indigo with one stubborn orange streak like a smudge of saffron along the horizon. You stand slowly, letting the last of the day's warmth slip from the stone into your skin, and then begin to walk again, deeper into the garden's memory. And as you do, you realize something strange. This quadrant, once so hushed, feels full. Full of things left unsaid, of long-ago whispers, of petals and peacocks, and precise angles calculated centuries before you even existed. Still, the path beckons. There's more to see. You follow the path as it bends again, more narrow now, the gravel crunching beneath your feet like crumpled parchment. Ahead, the garden shifts once more. Not in any dramatic way, but subtly, like a new chapter of a book you're already reading, but didn't notice turning the page. The fifth quadrant, if you can call it that, is less structured, less symmetrical. There's a quiet wildness here, a softness in the landscaping, like a corner someone meant to prune last week, but got distracted by a mango tart. A gentle incline leads you up a terraced rise. Low stone steps, barely the height of your ankle, guide you past terracotta pots with faded glaze and ferns that seem just a little too happy to be left alone. The air here smells like crushed mint, overripe figs, and maybe, just maybe, a hint of wet stone and thyme. Historians still argue whether this was a recreational terrace or a meditation platform, but judging by the casual placement of those very old, very decorative benches, it seems like a solid location for imperial loitering. You picture a nobleman reclining in silk, sipping something suspiciously wine, like from a tiny goblet, while complaining about monsoon humidity and pretending to appreciate poetry. On your left, a small alcove appears, cut into the stone. There's a fountain basin, dry now, but its scalloped edges and floral carvings hint that it once burbled with water, the kind that caught moonlight in ripples. Mughal engineers were absolute water nerds. Gravity, fed systems, aqueducts, underground channels. They could get water to dance uphill if they really wanted it to. One system reportedly carried fresh water over 30 miles, using nothing but slope, clay pipes, and unflinching optimism. You peer into the basin, now home to a few crisp leaves and one very smug lizard. He blinks at you, tail twitching, completely unbothered. You decide to leave him in peace. After all, this is probably his corner now. Beyond the fountain, the garden opens again into a soft, sloping lawn. Here, things feel lived in, less ceremonial, more personal. Maybe this was where courtiers came to sneak a nap, or where royal children chased each other with silk kites until someone cried, and the nursemaid had to mediate. You pause beneath a neem tree and glance up, its branches etched against a now purpling sky. The sun has finally dipped behind the garden walls, and dusk is stretching out her limbs, ready to settle in. To your right, a low stone wall lines the terrace edge, and beyond it, you can glimpse the tops of city buildings, some modern, some ancient, and all glowing with that end of day haze. The city is still there, beating and buzzing, but here, in this garden, it feels like background noise, like a faraway song you can't quite place. The only sounds now are your own footsteps, the sigh of breeze through leaves, and the very distant, very lazy flap of a bird's wings. Another bench waits up ahead. You drop onto it, spine meeting cool marble, and stretch your legs out. A small, square lantern sits nearby, unlit, but clearly once filled with oil and firelight. The Mughals were big on nighttime strolls, often continuing into the early hours, their way lit by rows of flickering lamps and the occasional overly enthusiastic firefly. There's a story, half history, half whispered myth, that Emperor Shah Jahan, once ordered an entire walkway lined with rose petals and illuminated by floating lanterns for a midnight date. Historians still argue whether the lanterns were real or metaphorical, but if that's not the most extra walk in the park ever, I don't know what is. The evening air thickens a little, not unpleasantly. It carries warmth from the stone and the faint, sweet musk of flowering night jasmine. You inhale deeply, then blink slowly, a little heavier than before. The colors around you begin to blur at the edges. Magenta softens to violet, green folds into shadow, and even the marble seems to glow faintly with memory. And then something odd. A small bell rings in the distance. Not a grand toll, not a temple clang, but something intimate, perhaps from the caretaker's quarters, or a reminder that somewhere out there, dinner is being served. You imagine platters of saffron rice, spiced lentils, and warm, puffy bread being carried past the same flower beds you just walked through. Maybe even the ghost of a mango lassie, floating invisibly past your nose. Your stomach grumbles, and you pretend it's just the wind. Back on your feet again, gently this time, knees not quite loving the cold stone. You descend the terrace by another set of steps. Here the gravel shifts to red sandstone, the path bordered by ornamental grasses that wave lazily in the wind, like little green dancers that never get dizzy. And ahead, there it is. A small gateway. Not the grand gate you entered through. This one's modest, almost hidden behind a veil of flowering vines and an overhanging fig tree. You step closer. The wood is old, but the metal fittings gleam faintly, as if someone cared enough to polish them regularly. You push it open. It doesn't creak, which is both disappointing and satisfying, and find yourself in a smaller, enclosed courtyard. This might have been a zenana garden, reserved for royal women. There's no clear signage, just the feeling of privacy, quiet, and beauty tailored to a subtler audience. A water basin lies in the center, surrounded by square planters filled with herbs and low, sweet-smelling shrubs. Rose, basil, marjoram, and something like lavender, though Mughal lavender tended to be more perfumed and slightly judgmental. It's said the Empress Nur Jahan had a particular fondness for designing herbal gardens and even wrote treatises on the medicinal properties of flowers. Historians still debate how involved she was in court policy versus garden maintenance. But if your royal hobby is horticultural science, honestly, power to you. The walls of the courtyard are tall and warm to the touch, holding onto the day's sunlight like an old dog hoarding heat. You run your fingers along them as you walk. The surface is rough, embedded with tiny chips of glazed tile, blue, green, gold, like bits of forgotten mosaic that refuse to fade. You pause under another arch, smaller than before, and realize the stars are starting to emerge above the lattice of leaves. Just a few, faint, quiet, like the garden's secret freckles, showing up now that it's removed its makeup. You're not done yet. There's more still hidden, waiting beyond the next turn. You step softly through the low archway, entering what feels like a hidden annex of the Mughal garden, almost as if you've wandered behind the curtain at a royal play. This part is quieter still, if that's even possible. The scent changes to somehow cooler and earthier, like damp roots and old stone, mixed with something faintly floral you can't quite place. Night has finally taken full hold, but the garden doesn't seem to mind. It simply shifts into its evening skin. Here, the walls close in slightly, enclosing a square courtyard with overhanging chichris. Those lovely top pavilions balanced on delicate columns. They're perched like birds resting between flights. Their silhouettes etched against the deepening indigo of the sky. These chihatris weren't just decorative. They marked status, shaded tired nobles, and made for very dramatic spots to sigh about politics or bad poetry. You duck under one of them, running a hand along the time-smoothed pillar. The stone feels cool and a little dusty, as though it's been quietly absorbing centuries of complaints, dreams, and maybe one too many mango-related accidents. There's a worn cushion still tucked in the corner, faded silk, possibly left behind, or maybe placed there on purpose by the current caretakers who clearly respect a good historical nap nook. A tiny canal snakes through this courtyard, more narrow than the grand channels from earlier, and its trickle is gentle, almost whispery. This wasn't for grand water displays. It was probably for cooling the air and lulling the ears. Historians still argue whether these whisper canals were designed for climate control or spiritual symbolism. Perhaps both. The Mughals had a thing for balanced body and soul, heat and cool, silence and song. You lean over it, watching a single leaf float by like a miniature ship on a mission it doesn't really care about. You follow the canal with your eyes until it disappears under another small arch, where moonlight now spills across the floor like silver paint. The tiles beneath your feet form a patterned walkway, floral motifs, repeating stars, maybe even a slightly smug-looking parrot if you squint. Mughal tiles weren't just pretty, they were narrative. Each color was made painstakingly by hand, using ground minerals, fire, and sheer obsessive patience. The blue came from lapis lazuli, imported at great cost, which is just the kind of effort you'd expect from an empire that said, "We want floors so nice." You feel guilty stepping on them. You round a corner, and the space opens again. This time into what must have been an outdoor dining area. There's a wide stone platform with low steps, shaded by a canopy of ancient vines, now thick with blossoms. Petals have fallen across the stones like confetti from a party that ended about 400 years ago. You step carefully, not wanting to crush them, even though they're already halfway to being mulch. In the center of the platform stands a low marble table, square and ornate, with delicate carvings of vines curling around the legs. You imagine royal meals laid out here, silver trays, ornate spice boxes, bowls of saffron rice so fragrant you'd cry a little just smelling it. There's even an old wine amphora half, buried in a corner, cracked and definitely empty, unless the ghost of a party is still sipping. According to one slightly dramatic scholar, Emperor Jahangir once demanded that mangoes served in his garden meals be chilled in ice carried from the Himalayas, wrapped in layers of wool. Historians still argue whether this was a regular thing or just a one-time tantrum. Either way, the takeaway is clear. You would not have survived the Mughal dinner table unless you came prepared with a napkin, a poetry quote, and a very high mango tolerance. You sit on the stone platform for a moment. The air is heavier now, cooler on the back of your neck. Somewhere nearby, a peacock calls once, just a single, lonely note, and then silence again. Your hand brushes over a shallow indentation in the platform's surface, probably once used to hold a lantern or incense burner. You imagine the mingling scents, rosewater, sandalwood, charred cinnamon bark, wrapped around the night like a cloak. Suddenly, you hear a soft rustling in the ivy wall behind you. You freeze, not in fear, more in that half, snoozy curiosity where your body forgets how legs work. A moment later, a civet appears, eyes shining in the dark. It pauses, blinks, stares, and then, without ceremony, trots off again like a fluffy little ghost. You've just been judged by a small jungle cat. The night is complete. You decide to rise, legs a little stiff, and move on. Past the platform, another narrow path beckons, lined with short hedges and clusters of night, blooming cereus, their white blossoms glowing faintly in the moonlight like shy lanterns. The air smells sweeter here, and you can't help but slow down. Each step sinks into packed earth and loose petals, like the ground itself wants to rock you to sleep. Ahead, you spot a narrow doorway built into the side wall. It's lower than the others, made of darker stone. You step through and find yourself in what must have been the garden's private bath area. The Mughals were deeply committed to cleanliness. Bathing wasn't just hygiene, it was ritual. The hammam, or bathhouse, was an extension of luxury and devotion. Here, though, it's open air. You look down into a sunken pool, dry now, but still holding a faded echo of splashing water and murmured conversations. One scholar claimed that some Mughal gardens were designed with secret tunnels connecting them to underground baths and escape passages, though historians still argue whether that's true or just a very elaborate architectural fan theory. But standing here, under the stars, with the stone damp from recent rains, you start to believe it. You really do. A few steps more, and you reach a narrow ledge that looks out over the outer wall. The garden below, the domes and trees, even the distant gate, all of it stretches out under the moon's silvery eye. You can see it now, the geometry, the artistry, the full scale of the place. It's like standing inside a perfectly balanced drawing made by someone who wasn't afraid to use a ruler and a whole lot of peacocks. You lean forward just a little, and the breeze lifts your hair. It's not cold, just insistent. Like it's trying to tell you that there's more garden waiting, that the walk isn't over yet. You believe it. You smile, and you keep going. You descend the narrow steps from the ledge, one careful foot at a time. The stone is slightly uneven here, the moss brushing your sandals like the garden's way of reminding you not to rush. Not that you were in a hurry anyway. Let's face it, you're about as motivated as a marble elephant in a heat wave. And that's exactly the vibe this section of the garden seems to encourage. You find yourself now in a long, shaded walkway framed by rows of low citrus trees. The scent is unmistakable orange blossoms, lime rinds, something vaguely lemony but with a dusty, antique twist. You reach up, brushing a branch, and a tiny lime falls at your feet. Tempting, but you decide against pocketing it. That's how people end up cursed in historical fiction. These citrus trees weren't planted just for snacks. They symbolized prosperity, health, and possibly fancy afternoon cocktails that we're never officially told about. In Mughal times, gardens weren't merely decoration. They were layered experiences, packed with symbolism and political messaging. Citrus, for example, was seen as both healing and exotic. A tree that smelled nice, looked symmetrical, and fought off scurvy. Triple threat. You pass a stone bench shaped like a half moon, its surface still warm from the sun's earlier embrace. Someone has carved their initials here quite recently. There's something endearingly petty about that. 4 centuries of perfectly preserved floral design, and someone decided what the marble needed was MZ. You wonder who they were. Lovers. Tourists. Just 2 people trying to leave a mark on something that has outlasted dozens of dynasties. You sit for a moment, stretching your legs and letting your spine ease into the cool curve of the bench. The moon is higher now, and from this angle, it lights up the tops of the citrus trees, turning their leaves to pale silver. You hear a small splash nearby, probably a frog launching itself off a lily pad with dramatic flair, or a fish slapping the water in protest of your presence. Either way, nature's got opinions tonight. Just ahead lies a slightly elevated octagonal platform. These 8-sided pavilions were common in Mughal gardens, each one designed to reflect cosmic order and architectural drama. You climb the few steps, the breeze shifting just enough to carry the scent of cardamom and something faintly smoky. It's not incense exactly, more like the ghost of a feast, lingering long after the flames went out. The platform gives you a different view, geometrical perfection unfurling from every angle. The symmetry is so precise, you half expect a grid to appear over your vision like a video game. Mughal architecture was all about this harmony: quadrants, axis lines, water symmetry, and celestial orientation. Some scholars claim the gardens mirrored the Quranic paradise, where rivers of water, milk, honey, and wine flowed in 4 directions. Historians still argue whether these interpretations were literal intentions or spiritual metaphors that just happened to involve a lot of landscaping. You trace the pattern on the floor with your finger. Each tile is inlaid with tiny slivers of gemstone. Nothing flashy, just enough to catch the moonlight like stardust. It's delicate, and you're amazed it's lasted. Perhaps it's been restored over time, or perhaps it's just been protected by sheer respect. Or luck. Luck always has a seat at history's table. To your left, a side path veers off from the main flow. It's narrower, hemmed in by taller hedges, and almost completely shadowed. You follow it because, well, obviously, this is the mysterious side path moment. It leads you to a small enclosed garden. Within the garden, what the Mughals might have called a chahar-bai, or 4-part garden. This miniature version still holds to the classic layout, a square split into quadrants by 2 perpendicular water channels. At the center, instead of a fountain or throne, there's a lone tree. It's a neem tree, sacred, medicinal, and definitely not what you'd expect at the center of a royal design. The bark is rough, the branches twisty, the leaves fine and almost feathery. Neem has been used for everything from toothbrushes to acne cures to ancient mosquito warfare. Some historians believe this little courtyard was meant for healing, not just display. Others say neem trees were planted for their pest-repelling properties. Historians still argue whether this spot was ceremonial or practical, or both. It always seems to be both with these people. A stone water basin sits at the base of the neem. You kneel beside it, running your fingers through the fine grit at the bottom. Dry now, but shaped perfectly to cradle reflection. Literal and figurative. You wonder how many royal feet walked these stones, how many quiet nights passed just like this one, with someone sitting under this exact tree, wondering what came next. You stay there a while, long enough that a moth starts circling you like you're just another part of the landscape. Then a second one joins. Apparently, you're hosting a small winged party. At least they don't expect snacks. When you finally stand, your legs hum with the sleepy ache of a long walk, and your shoulders have relaxed in that way that only happens after spending a lot of time in a place older than all your worries. You exit the small courtyard and rejoin the main path, which begins to widen again, pulling you forward like a soft current. Ahead, you glimpse another garden chamber, this one with a central pond lit by moonlight. But that, you suspect, is for later. For now, the citrus air follows you, gently pressing against your skin, cooling your temples. Your shadow stretches long in front of you, flickering slightly as it passes through the leaves above. You're not quite sure where you're headed, but that's kind of the point. This walk isn't about destination. It's about the slow unraveling of time under a sky too big to care. So you keep going. You always do. The gravel crunches softly under your feet now, a different texture from the flagstones earlier. Coarser, more rustic, like the garden is subtly nudging you into a new mood. This stretch opens wide, almost like a courtyard, bordered by elegant sandstone columns that seem to glow from within under the rising moon. You pause to admire one, octagonal fluted, delicately carved with curling vines that make it feel more like pastry than stone. It's a reminder that even the boring bits of history were done with flair. As you continue walking, you hear the soft trickle of water before you see it. Then, just ahead, a long, narrow channel opens up, flanked by low walls carved with floral motifs. The water flows lazily, catching moonlight like silver thread unspooling across marble. These channels, called rills, weren't just for show. They cooled the air, muffled noise, and mirrored the heavens. The Mughals were big on mirrors, in case the stars didn't notice how stylish they were. You kneel beside the rill, dipping a finger into the water. It's cooler than you expect, startling for a second, then soothing. The current brushes past your skin like silk. These garden waterworks weren't thrown together haphazardly. They were feats of hydraulic engineering. Channels sloped with precise angles, some even outfitted with underground pipes and reservoirs. In a time before plumbing apps and municipal water bills, this was wizardry. Across the rill is a low platform surrounded by pots of herbs, basil, fennel, coriander, and something suspiciously minty. There's even a spiky little aloe vera plant, looking like it's preparing for battle. This garden wasn't just pretty. It fed people, healed people, and occasionally freshened their breath. Some scholars believe these herb corners were tended by royal physicians. Others claim it was the harem women, nurturing remedies and recipes in their spare time. Historians still argue whether the herb beds were elite apothecaries or glorified spice racks. The smell is wonderfully muddled, sweet, bitter, earthy, and a little peppery. You imagine someone centuries ago, crouched exactly where you are, crushing basil between their fingers, maybe prepping a poultice, or trying to impress a dinner guest. There's a timelessness to it. Planting something small, watching it grow, hoping it does what you want. Kind of like parenting, but greener and less judgmental. You stand again, brushing grit from your palms, and continue along the rill. It leads you to a circular basin, perfectly round, like someone dropped a moon onto the lawn. A small fountain bubbles at its center, more of a whisper than a spray. The reflection of the stars here is so crisp, you almost lose track of which way is up. Your own face stares back at you, rippling slightly as the fountain murmurs on. This kind of design, the centered fountain, surrounded by open space, was a Mughal signature. They were deeply influenced by Persian ideals of paradisy symmetry, water enclosure, and the sound of flowing streams. The garden wasn't just a break from court politics. It was politics. A ruler's garden showed power, order, divine favor. The more precisely arranged your petunias, the more legitimate your claim to the throne. You walk a slow circle around the basin. In the moonlight, you spot a crumbling stone relief partially buried in the grass. It's the shape of a peacock, wings unfurled, tail arched into impossible geometry. The Mughal obsession with birds was no joke. They collected them, painted them, wrote poems about them. Some emperors had personal falcons that flew with jeweled hoods. Jeweled hoods. That's one fashion trend historians aren't arguing about. They just quietly admire it and move on. Near the peacock carving is a shaded alcove built into the garden wall. You duck inside. It's low and cool, smelling faintly of damp stone and dried petals. Niches are carved into the walls, probably once filled with oil lamps. You can imagine them glowing at dusk, casting golden puddles of light onto perfumed robes and whispered conversations. Some scholars believe these alcoves were resting spots for poets and scholars. Others argue they were simply architectural afterthoughts, like the Mughal version of a garden bench. Historians still argue whether they were sanctuaries for ideas or just good places to nap. You sit for a moment in the alcove, letting the walls wrap around you. A bat flits by overhead, just a flutter of wings in the corner of your vision. You try not to flinch. It's probably minding its own business. Probably. From this vantage point, you see the garden laid out like a blueprint, grids of green, veins of water, bones of marble and red sandstone. It's mesmerizing. All this order, carefully maintained, even though nature keeps trying to do its own thing. You spot a rogue vine trying to scale a pillar, undeterred by centuries of pruning. It's a little rebellious. You root for it, silently. Eventually, you rise, stretching your back as quietly as possible so you don't startle any more stealth bats. The path veers left now, away from the formal structures, into what looks like a wilder patch. The trees grow closer together here, their trunks thicker, leaves darker. The gravel fades into hard, packed earth. It's less curated, more secretive. Less royal showcase or enchanted forest behind the palace. You catch a glint of something metallic half, buried in the dirt. A rusted old gardening spade, maybe. Or an ancient tool left behind by someone who got distracted by a poem and never came back. It's these little artifacts that make you feel time bending. The people who built this garden are long gone, but their fingerprints are everywhere, etched into the stone, soaked into the soil, hiding in the smell of crushed mint. You take a deep breath, the air cooler now, tinged with night. The breeze stirs the trees above you, rustling like fabric. You could stay here, you think, in this moment. No noise, no screens, no deadlines, just the patient architecture of a world that was never in a hurry. But your feet, as always, carry you forward. One more bend in the path, one more secret to discover. The bend in the path curves gently, like a thought unfinished, drawing you into a darker grove, where the branches stretch a little lower and the air gets just a whisper cooler. You brush past a hanging cluster of jasmine that's gone feral, its sweet scent hitting you like a perfume sample at a department store you didn't mean to walk through. The petals glow faintly in the moonlight, tiny 5, pointed stars clinging to vine. This part of the garden feels older, more private. You're not sure if it's intentional or just where the landscapers gave up centuries ago and said, "Eek, let it go wild." But there's something sacred in the neglect. Like the garden has grown tired of being admired and decided to reclaim a bit of mystery. Under your sandals, the ground changes again. You're walking now on a kind of natural stone mosaic. River pebbles pressed into patterns that might once have spelled out poetry or geometry or just really fancy Fleur decor. Some stones are missing, some cracked, but the effort remains, echoing the Mughal flair for turning even walkways into art. You think about how many feet have passed over this. Empresses in embroidered slippers, gardeners dragging watering cans, probably one goat who got lost. A soft breeze pushes at your back, leading you toward a squat, square structure nestled between 2 thick chinar trees. It's a small pavilion, almost humble by Mughal standards. Just a stone platform with an arched roof supported by 8 slender pillars. The floor is slightly raised, maybe a place for musicians to sit and play while royalty lounged nearby. Historians still argue whether these open, air pavilions were stages, reading nooks, or glorified tea stops. You step onto the platform. The stone is cool through the soles of your shoes. There's a faint indent in the middle. Someone sat here a lot, or something heavy did. Maybe an emperor's peacock throne. Maybe just a very determined cat. You sit down too, folding your legs lazily beneath you, and listen. Not for anything in particular, just for whatever the night is willing to give. Far off, an owl calls. Something rustles in the underbrush. But mostly, it's quiet. Not the kind of modern quiet where your brain fills the gaps with mental to-do lists and phantom phone vibrations. This is the old kind of quiet. The kind that doesn't ask you to do anything but breathe. The pavilion faces west, and though the sun is long gone, the sky still holds a trace of its blush. The clouds are turning that charcoal, lavender hue you only get during monsoon season. You remember reading somewhere that Mughal architects oriented structures not just for aesthetics, but to catch specific light at specific times of day. It wasn't just geometry, it was choreography. And while we're on light, here's a little gems. Some Mughal gardens were designed with moon phases in mind. Full moon nights, especially during spring, were prime time for strolls, poetry recitations, or just showing off your expensive robes under maximum natural lighting. The Emperor Babur himself reportedly loved moonlit garden walks. Historians still argue whether this was romanticism or insomnia. You stand up, stretching slowly, arms above your head like a sleepy cat. Behind the pavilion is a narrow gate, wooden, slightly ajar, hinges so old they probably squeak in iambic pentameter. You push it gently, and it swings open into what feels like a secret room. Enclosed on all sides by tall hedges, this part of the garden is almost like a sunken square, with a circular stone bench wrapped around a tree at its center. The tree is massive, not tall, but wide, like it decided vertical ambition wasn't worth the effort and doubled down on shade. Its roots twist around the bench and into the soil like lazy snakes. You sit, pressing your back to the trunk, feeling how it breathes beneath your spine. Trees do breathe in their own time. You get it now. why emperors would leave their thrones to come sit in the garden. The throne never offered bark that hummed quietly against your ribs. Above you, a few lanterns dangle from branches, unlit, long since rusted, but they swing a little in the breeze, clinking like sleepy wind chimes. You try to imagine them lit, casting dappled light on silk, clad courtiers, their shadows dancing over fruit and sherbet trays. Mughal feasts in gardens were full, sensory experiences, perfumes, music, food so heavily spiced it could probably wake the dead. One record mentions mangoes carved into swans. Swans. From mangoes. You suddenly feel very underachieving about your last snack. There's something whimsical about this spot. You almost expect a storyteller to emerge from the hedge with a lute and begin a fable involving parrots, treasure, and a moral about not being greedy. You think about how many stories might have started right here, and how many simply faded into the night air. Just beside the bench is a small, sunken stone basin, maybe a bird bath, maybe a foot-soaking pool, or perhaps an over-ambitious flower pot. It's dry now, filled with leaves and a single rusted ring. You tilt your head. Was it dropped in haste, or left behind deliberately? Historians still argue whether it's evidence of courtly romance or just someone's forgotten laundry token. As you brush your hand over the stone rim, your fingers catch on a bit of carving. A faint inscription in Persian script. Most of it's too worn to read, but one word still glows faintly under your fingers. Q. Love. Simple, undefended. Maybe that's what this garden is, at its quiet heart. Not just a monument to emperors and engineers, but to love in its many secret forms. You rise, stepping carefully out of the sunken grove, back onto the main path. The gravel has returned, obedient as ever, guiding you deeper into the dusk. Ahead, the trees thin again, revealing what looks like the glow of lamps. Dim, amber, promising. But as you pass through the next arch, the glow isn't from lamps at all. It's fireflies. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands, blinking lazily through the trees like someone shook a glitter jar through the branches. The air is thick with them, each one bobbing with its own tiny logic, lighting up just enough to remind you they're there. You stand still, afraid to break the spell. One lands on your shoulder. You whisper hello. You don't need to move yet. This moment can stretch a little longer. The garden allows it. That's the point. You linger among the fireflies for a while, each blink a slow nod from the universe that yes, it sees you, and yes, you can stay a little longer. You wave your hand gently through the warm air, and a few of the glowing specks drift aside, totally unimpressed. Somewhere in the near distance, there's the faint sound of water again. Just a few trickles, like someone slowly pouring tea. You follow it. The gravel crunches gently under your steps, and the scent of the air shifts. Less flowers now, more stone and water, and something earthy, almost metallic. The path dips slightly, guiding you down toward a rectangular tank sunken into the ground. Not massive, but not a bathtub either. This is a modest reflecting pool, set low like a secret mirror the sky can check itself in. And it's working. The moon floats perfectly on the surface, framed by the edges of intricately carved sandstone. You pause at the rim, looking down at it like it might blink back. Reflecting pools were a Mughal specialty, of course. More than just pretty puddles, they were architectural punctuation, each one placed deliberately to frame, balance, and calm. The Emperor Shah Jahan, yes, the Taj Mahal guy, was especially fond of them. His pools weren't just decorative, they were meant to double the beauty of what surrounded them. Historians still argue whether these pools were spiritual metaphors or just aesthetic overachievement. You kneel by the water and let your fingers hover just above the surface. The air here is thick with memory. There's no one around, but you feel like someone's watching. Not in a creepy way, more like the garden itself has paused to notice you. Across the pool, a narrow set of steps leads up to another terrace. You stand and climb slowly, pausing halfway to look back down. The water, the moon. Your own little figure crouched beside it. It's all still, quiet, deliberate. You feel more symmetrical already. At the top of the terrace is a stone platform edged with marble, worn smooth from generations of feet and weather. Here, you find a curious structure, not a pavilion, not quite a building, more like a giant stone frame. A jaroka, a royal window, the kind from which emperors would stand and give public audience, known as jaroka darshan, a way to be seen without being touched, to offer your presence like a divine snack to your people. The Mughals borrowed this idea from older Hindu traditions, but of course, gave it their own flair. More carving, more height, more of that. Just woke up and still look majestic energy. You lean on the ledge, looking out. Below is another quadrant of the garden. This one a little wilder, the plants more tangled, the symmetry breaking down as if time started to nibble at the edges. Somewhere in the underbrush, you swear you hear frogs chirping, because yes, even royal gardens get squatters. It's strange to think about how many things were meant to be seen from this exact vantage point. Imagine a Mughal emperor standing where you are now, robes brushing the stone, rings catching the morning sun, trying hard to look wise while secretly wondering what's for breakfast. Historians still argue whether jaroka appearances were sincere gestures or just heavily curated PR stunts. Either way, it worked. People would gather in droves just to catch a glimpse. You turn away from the view and glance back at the stone frame. The carving at the top has faded, but it once showed vines twisting around stars and crescents, symbols that made the architecture feel like poetry you could walk through. A nearby wall holds a sundial, shockingly accurate for something without batteries, though a bit inconvenient if you prefer cloudy days. As you move past the jaroka, you find a bench nestled beneath a low trellis. The vines have overgrown it slightly, curling over the top like an elderly dog curling around a nap. You sit, brushing aside a stray leaf, and hear the sound of paper crinkle. There, beside you, wedged in a crack of the bench, is an old parchment scrap. Not ancient, but not new either. You smooth it out carefully. It's a sketch. Rough lines in faded ink of a woman seated in this very garden, under this very trellis. Her features are delicate but strong. She's turned slightly to the side, looking away from the artist, or maybe from the moment itself. No signature, no date. Just a moment captured and forgotten. You tuck it back where you found it. Feels like the right thing to do. Maybe someone will discover it again centuries from now and think it was you who left it. There's a scent in the air now. Sharp, sweet, unmistakable ripe guava. You follow it predictably because guava doesn't wait. Around the corner, half hidden behind a sculpted hedge, is a small orchard, not grand but purposeful. Guava trees, lemon trees, and a few stubborn pomegranates straining under their own jeweled burdens. The Mughals loved fruit trees, not just for the food, but for what they represented: abundance, beauty, and maybe the chance to snack while pretending to philosophize. You pluck a guava, feel its weight in your palm, the little nubs on its skin. You don't bite it. Somehow it feels too ceremonial, but you carry it with you, like a fragrant, edible souvenir. As you walk through the orchard, your steps soften. The grass is longer here, and the path is less defined. The garden is relaxing too, no longer trying to impress you, just gently exhaling. You spot a peacock feather wedged in a bush. Not the whole bird, just the calling card. You remember that peacocks were prized in Mughal gardens, not just for their looks, but their voices, which, spoiler alert, sound more like screaming dinosaurs than elegant dancers. But hey, beauty has its quirks. The orchard ends at a small domed alcove, a chhatri. Not the rain-blocking kind, but a stone canopy often used as a tomb marker or a quiet retreat. This one is empty, save for a circular seat inside, and a tiny niche in the wall that holds a now dry oil lamp. You sit again, just because the stone seems to want you to. Above, the stars are starting to outshine the garden. One by one, they flicker to life like slow, steady applause for a show the garden's been performing all day. You tilt your head back, feeling the dome echo the shape of the sky above it. For a moment, you are between two heavens. And then, soft footsteps. Not yours. Not human, either. You glance to the edge of the orchard and catch the flash of movement. Two eyes glinting, a long tail flicking low. A mongoose, just strutting like it owns the place. Which, let's be honest, it probably does. Mughals like to keep them around as pest control, and rumor has it some emperors believed they brought luck. Historians still argue whether that's superstition or just a convenient excuse for having cute guard animals. The mongoose doesn't stop. It vanishes into the hedge like a whisper. You stay still, listening again. The garden returns to its resting rhythm. Water murmurs. Leaves shift. The scent of guava fades. And you rise again, because there's still more garden left to explore. You leave the domed chhatri behind, stepping lightly as if the mongoose might circle back to demand rent. The garden has taken on a different mood now. Less like a royal display, and more like a memory you accidentally wandered into. The light is low, not quite darkness, but definitely past the golden hour. Everything looks softened at the edges, like it's being filtered through sleep. The path curves toward the northwest quadrant, the one you hadn't wandered into yet. It's quieter here, no fountains burbling, no symmetries shouting for attention, just a wide, low field of grass bordered by flowering shrubs and stubby trees that seemed to have grown however they pleased. This was likely once a space for quiet prayer, or maybe for royal children to chase dragonflies. Historians still argue whether such sections were deliberately informal or just lazily maintained after the emperor got distracted by, well, maybe dinner. You spot a small stone pedestal near the center, with nothing on it now, just a flat surface that might once have held a sculpture, a vase, or a bowl of floating marigolds. The stone's been scratched with what looks like game markings, ancient tic-tac-toe, possibly. Or maybe something far older, like Pachisi. The Mughals loved games. Emperor Akbar even played giant board games inlaid into his palace floor using real people as pieces. You imagine him in his garden, hunched over a board, faking a losing move, just to see if his courtiers would panic. The pedestal's worn edges feel smooth beneath your hand, and you find yourself tracing the shallow carvings absent-mindedly. Just above it, a cluster of fireflies reappears. Not as many as before, but they seem to know you now. Friendly flickers orbiting like lazy satellites. You squint, trying to count them, and lose track at 15 because they refuse to cooperate. Moving on, you drift toward a corridor of low arches, slightly crumbling but still proud. This was likely a walkway for nobles, maybe even a perfumed passage that once had muslin curtains billowing in the evening breeze. The air here smells faintly of rose and vetiver, that deep grassy fragrance that says, someone wealthy sat here once and did nothing in style. A single oil lamp rests on a shelf set into the wall. It hasn't been lit in ages, but the soot stains above it suggest someone once came every night to light it. The wick is curled like a sleeping spider. You feel a moment of silence settle into your chest. Not heavy, just honest. As you pass through the archway, the path slopes downward slightly and opens into a strange, slightly off center courtyard. It's not the perfect symmetry of the rest of the garden. It almost looks like an afterthought, or maybe a mistake someone decided to keep. The floor is paved in red sandstone and pale marble inlays that form a half flower pattern, unfinished, or just artistically incomplete. Historians still argue whether this design was intentional or whether the workers ran out of time, budget, or patience. There's a tree in the middle, not a sapling or a manicured bonsai, but a real, grown, proud tree, an old neem, its branches twisted in a way that suggests it has been gossiping with the wind for decades. Neem trees were treasured for their medicinal qualities, but also their shade and their mildly judgmental personalities. You stand beneath it, placing your hand on the bark, and the trunk is cool. There are initials carved into the wood. Not recent, but not ancient either. Probably someone who got bored during a historical tour and decided to add a layer to the story. As you sit beneath the neem, a warm breeze lifts your collar. It brings with it the scent of smoke, faint not fire, but something cooked. Roasted, maybe. Somewhere beyond the garden walls, life is continuing. Bread is being made. Tea is being boiled. Families are gathering on mats. Stories pass between sips and yawns. You feel the garden narrowing its breath, not shrinking, just simplifying. The closer you move toward its edge, the more informal it becomes. Less designed, more surrendered to time. There's a kind of grace in that, like when someone finally stops worrying what their hair looks like and just enjoys the wind. Off to the side, you notice a row of clay vessels resting on their sides beneath a sloping tiled roof. This would have been the garden's water storage, possibly once cooled by buried chambers. Some historians believe these systems functioned like ancient air conditioning. Clay, water, ventilation, very clever. Others say it's wishful thinking, and that people just sat in the shade and complained. Probably both. You crouch by one of the vessels and press your ear against it. Nothing but your own breath echoed back. But for a second, you wish you'd heard something else, like the laughter of gardeners or the clinking of royal teacups. Standing again, you follow a dirt path that veers away from symmetry entirely. It's almost a footpath now, worn by more casual visitors, probably servants or garden caretakers, the ones who actually kept this place alive, the ones we rarely hear about in the history books. You spot a small bench here too, made not of marble but wood, simpler. The kind you'd drag out from under a tree during your lunch break. You sit stretching your legs, listening again. A breeze stirs the leaves above you. A night bird lets out a single, almost comically indignant chirp. Maybe you sat on its favorite branch, and just when you're sure the garden has nothing more to say, you notice something in the dirt beside your foot, half buried, almost invisible. You dig gently with your fingers and lift out a curved shard of painted tile, blue and white, maybe part of a floral mosaic, maybe a ceiling fragment from a time when this part of the garden had a pavilion of its own. You tuck it into your pocket, a real souvenir this time, one nobody will miss, but one that might whisper to you on future sleepy nights. With a small sigh, you rise and continue walking. The path here bends again, tracing the garden's outer edge like an outline in pencil. You're nearing the final quarter. The shadows are longer. The scents are deeper. You feel the garden exhaling for the night. You can't help but think of everyone who's walked this same route before you. Courtiers whispering gossip. Gardeners muttering about broken fountains. Poets composing metaphors they'll forget by morning. Maybe even emperors wondering whether their perfectly measured garden would still be beautiful after they were gone. Spoiler alert it is. You follow the outer edge now, guided more by instinct than plan. The path curves like the lingering scent of jasmine, gentle and refusing to rush. The marble gives way to packed earth, softened by centuries of footsteps, most of whom probably wore far more elaborate shoes than yours. There's a change in texture, underfoot and overhead. Pebbles crunch lightly as you step, and above, branches grow thick and wide, overlapping to form a leafy canopy. This part of the Mughal garden wasn't always on the postcards. It's a bit more wild, less tended. Some historians argue whether it was ever really finished at all or just left to evolve naturally, like a pet project that never quite made it to the emperor's daily checklist. You pause beside a squat brick structure, barely the height of your chest, its top layered with moss. It might have once been a water cistern or even a pedestal for a sundial. Or, if you ask fringe theorists, it was a secret portal to a garden beneath the garden, basically the Mughal version of a bat cave. No evidence for that, obviously, but don't let that stop your imagination from flexing. Near the base of the brickwork, a flowering creeper has decided to settle down permanently. Its blossoms glow faintly, as if they've soaked in enough daylight to stay softly lit after sunset. You lean closer, and the petals smell of something between mint and lemon peel. You're not sure if that's a botanical description or just what your nose has decided, but either way, you're charmed. Farther ahead, an alcove opens along the garden wall, framed by red sandstone columns and an intricately scalloped arch. You step into it without a second thought, and suddenly, the air feels hushed. The kind of space made for secrets. It's cooler in here. You can almost hear echoes, your own thoughts bouncing back a little slower than you sent them. The walls are etched with calligraphy, trails of Urdu poetry, maybe Persian too, looped and flowing like vines of ink. Some phrases are deeply carved, others nearly faded into the stone. You try to read one aloud, stumbling over the rhythm, and it rewards you with a sudden breeze through the archway. Coincidence? Probably. Magical? Also, yes. Some of these inscriptions are said to be lines from ghazals, those heart-twisting love poems that Mughal poets were masters at. Historians still argue whether this space was used for prayer, reflection, or just really dramatic pining. You lean against the wall and let your eyes wander. The ceiling is tiled with faded blue, remnants of a celestial pattern, probably meant to mimic the night sky. You count 6 stars, though some may just be artistic choices pretending to be constellations. Back outside, the garden has gone silver. Moonlight has arrived, casual and unbothered, turning everything into a softer version of itself. Shadows stretch in one direction now, long and elegant, like they're heading somewhere fancier than you. To your left, a narrow aqueduct cuts through the path. A small channel where water once flowed endlessly, connecting pools and fountains with soft gurgles. It's dry now, of course, but you imagine the sound. Think Spa soundtrack meets medieval irrigation system. Honestly, a top-tier combination. You skip across it and find yourself at what looks like a small orchard. Not a formal one, just a scatter of trees that bear familiar fruits. Mangoes, guavas, and something citrusy you can't quite identify. The Mughal emperors adored fruit, not just for flavor, but symbolism. Sweetness, fertility, the good life. There are records of Jahangir tasting new mango varieties like he was judging a royal bake-off. You pluck a fallen guava from the ground and roll it in your hands. It's soft, probably better left to the ants. Still, the act feels ritualistic, like you're participating in something older than you. A rustle behind you catches your attention. You turn slowly, expecting a bird or maybe a squirrel, but no, it's a peacock. Tail down, dignity intact, it struts past like you're the one who interrupted something. Mughals loved peacocks too, symbol of immortality, grace, and general fabulousness. You watch it until it disappears into a row of bushes, probably off to preen in moonlight. The orchard gives way to another walkway lined with narrow flower beds. Roses mostly, with a few rogue marigolds that clearly weren't invited but showed up anyway. The scent here is thick. Floral, yes, but also earthy and a little damp, like the plants are sweating perfume. You pass a gardener's tool shed, its door slightly ajar. Inside, rusted spades, a broom, and a clay jug resting on a hook. Probably not centuries old, but who's checking? Some historians have even found gardening journals left behind by palace staff. Detailed notes about which plants needed extra shade, or which squirrel was stealing figs. It's comforting somehow to know even in imperial times, someone was worried about overwatering the ferns. As you meander, you spot something strange, a section of the wall with tiles arranged in an odd pattern. Closer inspection reveals a mosaic of birds, not just generic pigeons, but specific species, parrots, hoopoes, bulbuls, each mid-flight, mid-chirp, mid-gossip. Some are missing an eye or a wing, chipped away by time, but they still seem mid-conversation. This wall may have been part of a scholar's corner, a nook for reading and listening. Historians still argue whether it was built with acoustics in mind or simply coincidental, but you notice how clearly your footsteps echo here. You clap softly once, and it rebounds like applause. You bow theatrically. No one's watching, but the birds approve. Moving along, you find another bench, this one of black stone, cooler than the rest. You sit, and for a while, do nothing. Just breathe. The stars are visible now. Not a lot, but enough to remind you that above even royal ambition, there's always sky. A lizard skitters across your path. You do not scream. You are very mature about it. Somewhere nearby, a night flower blooms with a pop. It might have been silent, but in your head, it was dramatic. You imagine ancient guests leaning back on velvet cushions, fanning themselves and murmuring about poetry while someone strummed a sitar in the background. Your eyes close just briefly, the garden whispering around you like an old friend telling bedtime stories. You're not asleep, but you are definitely farther from waking. And the path still isn't done. The path ahead is almost shy now, half, covered in fallen petals, some still clutching the last bits of sunset's warmth. You walk slower, not out of fatigue, but because the garden seems to be holding its breath. You feel like an intruder and a welcome guest all at once. To your left, the wall begins to curve. The corners in Mughal gardens are rarely abrupt. Everything flows, just like the water that once moved along its channels. In this soft bend, another structure comes into view. One of the smaller pavilions, or baradaris, made for shade poetry and whispered political intrigue. It's 12, pillared, as the name suggests, and though weather-worn, still gives off that, built to impress even your enemies, energy. You step inside, and the air changes again. Cooler, maybe. Or is that just the sound dampening? You run your hand along a pillar, smooth in parts, chipped in others. At the center of the floor is a low platform, possibly used for sitting cross, legged during storytelling or music, or for displaying trays of mangoes. Priorities. There's graffiti here too, layered across generations. A heart carved with a shaky hand. A Persian couplet scratched lightly into stone. One message just says, "Rafi was here." Probably not a prince, but hey, maybe Rafi was a rebel poet with a good sense of humor and bad penmanship. Historians still argue whether this pavilion was meant purely for leisure or also served as a quiet meeting point for royal advisors. Either way, it's held a lot of secrets. Outside again, you're greeted by a trickling sound. At first, you think it's your imagination until you follow it. A small fountain is still working. Not shooting water like in the old days, but a modest burble, like it's clearing its throat after a nap. The fountain is octagonal, another classic shape in Mughal design. Orderly, pleasing, symmetrical. You crouch beside it and run a finger along the rim. Smooth marble. The water is surprisingly cold. You wonder how many people before you have paused here, fingers dipped in the same chill. The emperors, the gardeners, asleep, deprived architect wondering whether to add another arch. You sit on the edge, and it feels like a sacred act. The night has fully arrived now, cloaking everything in velvet. A breeze stirs the garden's hem, rustling leaves like the soft turning of ancient pages. In the distance, you catch a glimpse of lantern light, probably from a caretaker's quarters or an adjacent courtyard. It flickers through a screen of jolly work. Those intricately carved marble windows designed to let in light and air while keeping out the harshness of the outside world. And nosy neighbors. You wander toward it, passing under a row of neem trees. Their smell is sharp, slightly bitter, and strangely calming. Neem leaves were once used in Mughal medicine. Everything from fevers to weird skin issues. Historians still debate whether their medical efficacy was overhyped or underdocumented. But even today, neem soap is a bestseller in certain corners of the world. The more things change, right? A low wall borders the next section, interrupted by a shallow gateway. You duck under it. It's oddly short, as if built for children or people in deep humility. On the other side, another surprise. A rectangular platform raised just slightly off the ground, tiled in glazed blue and white. A sleeping area, maybe, or a place for prayer. Or possibly just a really extra picnic spot. You lie down on it without thinking. It's warm from the day, cool from the night, basically nature's memory foam. Above you, the sky is a soft navy, and the stars have fully shown up to the party. One of them streaks across the sky, and you make a wish, even though you're not sure you're still awake. The garden around you is quiet, but not silent. Crickets chirp like they're tuning tiny instruments. Something rustles now and then, but always politely. You're in a place built for harmony. Between architecture and landscape, between sound and silence, between human effort and nature's gentle stubbornness. You rise and walk again, slower this time, like you're trying not to wake the flowers. A patch of tuberoses to your left smells like late night weddings and childhood shampoo. You touch one, and it leans toward you, which might be science or might just be friendliness. Ahead, a low fence marks the garden's outer boundary. Beyond it, the city begins again. You can hear faint horns, maybe a scooter, someone playing a late tabla riff on a radio. But here, inside, it's still the 1600s. You're still an honorary guest of emperors who once tried to trap paradise in geometry. You turn down one last corridor, bordered by bushes that have been trimmed into geometric shapes. Some look like domes, others like half-hearted cubes. They cast funhouse shadows under the moonlight, and you laugh quietly. Nature tolerates our designs, but it always sneaks in a little whimsy. The corridor ends at a small pond. Not one of the centerpiece water features, but more of a tucked away mirror. It reflects the sky so perfectly you're tempted to touch it, just to check it's not glass. Dragonflies skim its surface. Night shift versions of their daylight cousins. A frog makes a solitary bloop and vanishes. You kneel beside it and stare at your reflection. You look calmer, more glowy, maybe even mysterious, like someone who's seen the quiet side of an empire and decided not to tell anyone. Or maybe that's just what moonlight does. It makes everyone look like a ghost of something worth remembering. You stand and dust off your hands. The night is wearing on, and the garden feels like it's preparing to tuck itself in. Lights from the palace buildings are dimming, and the wind picks up, cool and firm, as if nudging you gently toward your final steps. The walk isn't over. Not yet. You press forward, and the gravel underfoot crunches like popcorn in slow motion. This part of the garden feels different. It's less symmetrical, less obviously planned, as if nature was given a bit more freedom here. Mughal gardens were famous for their quadrilateral perfection, but sometimes the designers let corners go wild, just for texture. And this is one of those corners. A pomegranate tree leans slightly over the path, its branches heavy with both ripe fruit and curling petals. You pause, look up, and catch the faint outline of a fruit split open. Inside ruby, red seeds glistening like treasure. Historians still argue whether these gardens were designed more for aesthetic pleasure or practical cultivation. And here, you start to wonder the same, because this looks like a tree meant for plucking, not posing. You keep moving. The air shifts again, growing heavier and cooler. Somewhere nearby, the Yamuna River flows, though you can't see it, but the garden can feel it. Everything leans toward it subtly, like a houseplant straining for the window. Even the flowers seem to tilt eastward, as if the river is some magnetic secret. You arrive at a stone bench, not marble this time, but a simpler sandstone slab with floral carvings, worn nearly flat by centuries of backsides. You sit, because that's what you do in Mughal gardens. You pause. It's practically a rule. These weren't places to rush through. They were for composing poetry, brooding dramatically, or just drinking sherbet until your tongue turned pink. From this angle, you spot a solitary chhatri, a domed pavilion perched atop 4 elegant pillars, almost like a garden crown. It's small but proud, and you walk over to it, ducking under its arch. Inside, the dome above you has faded floral patterns painted into its inner shell. Most of the colors are gone now, but you can imagine what they used to be. Royal blues, golds, perhaps a shock of crimson. Someone once stood here and thought, let's paint flowers above the flowers. Because one layer of beauty clearly wasn't enough. The acoustics are weirdly perfect in the chhatri. You whisper, hello, and it comes back to you rounder, like it's been polished. Historians still debate whether these domes were intended for musical recitals or solitary contemplation. You decide both are valid. You hum a few notes, and the sound floats up, dances around, then disappears into the night air. When you exit the pavilion, a breeze greets you like an old friend. It rustles a patch of tall grass at the edge of the path, revealing a sleepy hedgehog or possibly just a very slow, moving rock. You don't disturb it either way. The stars above are brighter now, like they've decided to turn up the wattage just for you. There's Orion, leaning sideways. And there's the North Star, which emperors once used for orientation. Because before Google Maps, all you had was the sky, a good pair of sandals, and a lot of guessing. You move along a narrow stream that cuts through this quieter part of the garden. It used to be part of a full water channel system called the Narai, Behisht, or Stream of Paradise. These channels symbolized rivers flowing in the Islamic image of heaven, and the layout wasn't just for aesthetics. It was spiritual cartography. Paradise, but make it scalable. This stream is mostly dry now, just a few puddles reflecting the stars. You hop over one and land with a soft thud, narrowly missing a snail who's on his own midnight journey. You apologize. He forgives you, probably. Past a cluster of fragrant champa trees. Yellow blossoms so thick the scent practically mugs you. You enter a stretch of colonnade. Stone arches line the walkway, their shadows overlapping like ancient rib cages. You run your hand along one column and feel the grooves where vines once clung. Now the stone is bare, but not lonely. Through the arches, you glimpse a final walled area. Your feet guide you there without thought, drawn by a sense of completion. The gate is narrow and arched, its wooden doors partly open. You push gently, and they creak just a little, like they're stretching after a long nap. Inside, the final courtyard. It's smaller than the others, more intimate. Raised beds of herbs and low, growing shrubs form crisp rectangles, each bordered by stone. There's no grand fountain here, just a trickle from a corner spout, barely audible over the night breeze. You kneel and run your hand over the nearest bed. Mint, then basil, then something sharper, a Juane maybe, a kitchen garden, tucked into a royal dreamscape. Even emperors needed seasoning. Or maybe this was meant for medicinal use. Many Mughal queens were expert herbalists. Empress Nur Jahan herself was said to create her own perfumes and potions, combining science with elegance. Historians still argue whether her formulas were based on ancient Ayurvedic texts or court experimentation. Either way, her skincare game was untouchable. You sit on the edge of the garden bed, inhaling the sharp mix of leaves and damp soil. It's not dramatic like jasmine or rose, but it's real, grounding. A reminder that all this grandeur began with earth and water. A moth flutters past, nearly brushing your cheek. You don't flinch. The garden is alive, but it no longer demands your attention. It shares space with you now. You close your eyes for a moment and listen. There's the trickle of water, the hush of leaves, and your own breath. This final corner of the Mughal garden holds no monuments, no peacocks, no marble declarations. Just plants that heal and feed. It's quiet power, the kind that grows whether you're watching or not. When you open your eyes again, the night has deepened. You can sense the finish line ahead, one last pathway, one last breath of garden air. You rise gently, careful not to disturb a single leaf. You step away from the herb beds like you're leaving behind a secret you weren't supposed to find. The final stretch of garden lies ahead, a narrow corridor flanked by tall cypress trees. Those moody green spears that Mughals loved so much. To them, the cypress symbolized eternity and death, but in a serene, philosophical way. Not in a "you're doomed" sort of way. Still, the vibe here is reflective, less Instagram picnic, more quietly reevaluating your entire life choices. The stone path curves gently, guiding your feet without your needing to think. Each step sounds slightly hollow, like you're walking on memory. The wind shifts again, bringing the crisp scent of night blossoms. Tuberose this time, thick and honeyed. You slow down, not because you're tired, but because the garden seems to ask it of you. You've crossed from grandeur into reverence. A shallow octagonal pool rests at the corridor's center. Not a flashy one. No dancing fountains or marble lions spewing water. Just a pool, still and perfectly reflective. You crouch beside it and glance down. There's your face, a little softer in the moonlight, and the inverted cypress trees stretching toward you like underwater ghosts. Historians still argue whether pools like this were meant for practical cooling or cosmic symbolism. You're leaning toward symbolism, because there's something undeniably celestial about water that holds the sky. A small marble inscription rests at the far end of the pool. Faded Persian calligraphy, carved so delicately it looks like lace. You can't read it, but you trace it with your finger and imagine it says something like, "Rest here, for paradise is nearer than you think." Or maybe it just says, "No diving." Hard to tell. You rise, brushing your hands on your pants, and continue under an arched trellis. Vines, grape, or possibly jasmine, coil above you, forming a green canopy. A few petals drift down, catching in your hair. Somewhere nearby, a nightjar calls out with a sound that could be mistaken for laughter. Maybe it's laughing at you, or maybe it's just trying to get a date. Either way, the garden doesn't judge. A soft rustle catches your attention. From behind a fig tree, a pair of eyes blink at you. Probably a mongoose, the unofficial security guard of Mughal gardens. Historically, these little guys were welcome because they scared off snakes and looked fantastic while doing it. One emperor supposedly had a mongoose named Bahadur who wore a silk ribbon and ate from golden bowls. Historians still argue whether that's a charming tale or imperial overkill. You continue walking, the garden growing quieter with each step. It's like reaching the last few minutes of a lullaby, when even the notes start to fall asleep. Your body slows naturally, sensing with the silence. The path bends one final time and opens into a simple marble platform, raised, circular, and surrounded by low stone lamps. None of them are lit now, but once this space would have glowed like starlight trapped in bowls. You step onto the platform. The stone is warm, holding onto the last of the day's sun like a stubborn memory. You lie down, staring up at the inky sky, and every muscle relaxes as if on cue. Overhead, stars scatter themselves like sugar spilled by a distracted god. One shoots across, and you make a wish even though no one told you the rules. Lying here, you begin to understand why the Mughals poured so much thought into these gardens. This wasn't just landscaping. It was storytelling in soil and shadow. A place where geometry held hands with poetry and symmetry made space for reflection. The Mughals weren't just planting trees. They were planting meaning. You inhale deeply, catching the last wisps of tuberose and earth. A bat swoops silently overhead, out for its midnight snack. It doesn't mind you being here. The garden accepts quiet guests. And now, like a book with its final page turned, the garden begins to fade. Not because it's gone, but because it's completed what it needed to say. You don't need to leave, but you know the walk is over. All that's left now is the softness of the night and the slow unwinding of your thoughts. You close your eyes again, not because you have to, but because it feels like the right punctuation. So now, your body feels heavy in the good way, the way wet clay settles into a mold, the way sun-warmed stone cradles your back. The garden lies behind you, or maybe around you, gently shrinking into memory. The stars above stretch and yawn, brushing their elbows across the edges of sleep. The breeze has lost its urgency. No more messages to carry. No more petals to lift. Just the soft hush of wind as it folds the corners of the night around you like a well-worn quilt. You picture the vines curling a little slower now, the fountains quieting their voices, and the trees pressing their roots a little deeper into the earth. Nothing in this garden is in a rush. Even the moon moves at a pace your breath can match. Your fingertips recall the texture of marble, of bark, of cool water skimming across your skin. But the details are loosening now, like mist unraveling. The garden has shown you its secrets, and in return, it asks only one thing: rest. Let your thoughts settle like fallen leaves. Let your breath become part of the breeze. Let the stillness of centuries hold you, gently, until morning stirs again. This was your walk through a Mughal garden at sunset. And maybe, just maybe, you didn't survive it because now you're asleep.